So I'm going to put you in a quick situation. You have ace king, you 3-bet preflop, your opponent calls, and you end up flopping top pair, top kicker. Cool, all's well and good so far, and I'm going to say you can either bet 1/3 pot on every single street, or you can bet 2/3 pot on every single street. And you might think that by betting twice as large on the flop, turn, and river, that you're going to have a final pot size that is also twice as large, and you would be dead wrong. And today, I'm going to prove it to you. We're going to go through an example step by step, bet by bet, and really make sense of how different bet sizing strategies can really massively impact the final pot size, and make sure that your bet sizing strategy that you choose actually accomplish the goals you have with your hand. Let's get started. Good morning, how are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit, and today we're going to talk about bet sizing. And really this whole concept of understanding what every dollar put or not put into a pot is going to do to final pot sizes is really called pot geometry at the end of the day. And while this concept can seem a little bit nerdy and overwhelming and maybe even over the top at times, by doing a little bit of this work and practice between sessions, it can really help you in real time choose sizing strategies that work for what you're trying to do in a particular hand. So let's take an example step by step, bet by bet, and really make sense of what's going on here. Alright, so this example is directly out of my new live cash game workbook. If we flip over to page 71 in the pot geometry chapter, the prompt at the top is you're playing a 1-2 cash game. The cutoff open raises to $8. You 3-bet from the small blind to 25 total, and the cutoff calls. And you opt to c-bet the flop. You have top pair, top kicker on a king 6-4 with a flush draw board. And here's the spot. So essentially we're going to compare two different strategies down below. What happens when you bet 1/3 pot on every single street? Of course, this is a very common bet size nowadays. And number two, what happens when you bet 2/3 pot on every single street. So we're really looking to compare both of those different bet sizing strategies, what they do to your bets on every single street, and of course what the final pot size is going to be both on the river and also if you get called on the river, what those differences look like. So at this point you could certainly take the time and do this totally by hand and just run through the table down below. So essentially on the flop, what is your bet size? Again, 1/3 of a $52 starting pot. What is the pot size after they call? And what's the effective stack left after they call? And continue the same thing for the turn and the river as well. Or you can use the included pot geometry spreadsheet. This is an updated version which accounts more for spots where there was an all-in or stacks got all-in somewhere along the line. But this is very, very simple. We only need to enter 5 different numbers and then we can get started. So we need the effective stack to start the spot. So right here, the effective stack, the smallest of the stacks between the two involved players is 275. Plug that in right here. Pot size to start the street is $52, and then the percentage of pot. So since the first set of questions on this page is talking about a 1/3 pot bet on every single street, the percentage of pot we can simply type in equals 1 divided by 3 to make sure that we're getting 1/3. Do the exact same thing for the turn, do the exact same thing for the river. Perfect. And then we see we're using a 1/3 pot bet on every single street, and we can see exactly what the bet sizes are on every single street, right? So 17 on the flop, 29 on the turn, and then 48 on the river. And the big number that I like to focus on here is really all of them on the river, but the pot size to start the street I think is very important. And then if you get called, knowing what that bet is, then what is the pot size after they call? And we notice here that it is 240. So I'm just going to plug that in right this moment. Of course, when you're actually doing the work in the workbook, sit here, take a moment, enter in everything. If you do a couple of these by hand, I think that's a really good idea too. And if you wanted to, you could say, okay, well, maybe I'm playing 1-2 and maybe my game, wherever card room I'm playing in, doesn't allow for, say, white chips to be used on different post-flop streets. I've played in some card rooms where that's the case. You could take the time and round all these bets. So maybe instead of betting 17, you bet either 15 or you bet 20. And then you can run these numbers from there. Maybe that doesn't apply as much for your 1-2 game where white chips might be in play more, but if you're playing 2-5, like the examples are later in this spot, or even 5-10, where you're definitely not going to be betting white chips post-flop almost ever, that might be something that you spend a little bit of time with. But that's really what we're doing here. So again, 240 right there. And then we can go through and we can compare it to betting 2/3 pot on every single street instead. And to do that, we can very simply go back to the spreadsheet. We can keep the same effective stack to start, same pot size to start, and then instead of equals 1 divided by 3, equals 2 divided by 3. So we can have a 2/3 pot bet on every single street. Perfect, equals 2 divided by 3, excellent. And again, we get our bet sizes for every single street, and we notice, of course, the bet size on the flop is going to be roughly twice as large. But here's the interesting one. On the river, we have 602. for the final pot size after they call, right? Final bet on the river is 159, much larger than the 40-ish something it was with the 1/3 pot strategy. And if we compare the final pot sizes between these two different strategies, betting 1/3 on each street and 2/3 on each street, you notice it's about 2.5x. So you might think that the final pot size would be just twice as large when you're betting twice as big, but that's actually not the case. And here's something to also consider, and one of the benefits of doing this step by step is if we actually look here, when we're looking at the spreadsheet itself, we are actually all in, right? Because if we look at the 159 bet on the river, that's actually not 2/3 of the pot size on the river. That's not 2/3 of a 284 starting pot on the river. It would actually be a larger bet than that. This is just factoring in for the fact that stacks got all in. So this would actually be an even bigger multiplier comparing the 1/3 versus 2/3 if the stacks were deeper, right? We could take this and make this 800, whatever. And we notice that the actual final pot size, if we made a full 2/3 pot bet on the river and got called, would actually be 662, right? Because the stack sizes are a little bit deeper, that bet size on the river would be a little bit bigger, and that is going to be, again, an even bigger multiplier compared to the 240 betting just 1/3 pot on every single street. Now at this point you might be thinking, okay, this is all well and good and very nerdy and maybe a little over the top for post-flop analysis between sessions, and of course when you bet bigger, the overall pot size is going to be bigger. Totally fair. But that said, this is still an issue that a lot of live cash game players still deal with, especially those that play a 1-2, 1-3, 2-5, because they look at this exact spot and they say, okay, well I'm going to bet 1/3 pot on the flop here because that's the normal bet size to make in a 3-bet pot, and fine, and maybe even smaller is more normal. But if you're playing against a bad player, why implement the 1/3 pot, even 1/3 pot just on the flop, when your overall goal against a bad player could be to make the home run pot in a situation like this, because they're going to get really sticky with any pocket pair. If they have like 10s or 9s, that's going to continue a lot, king x, etc. Why not just implement the larger size if that's in line with what you're trying to do, right? When you're playing against a reg or something like that, you need to be more focused on range versus range analysis. Fine, choosing a more normal strategy in terms of bet sizing is going to be totally fine. But when you're playing against those bad players, there's tons and tons of them in smaller live cash games, implementing the bigger sizing and understanding why you're doing it, what goals it's accomplishing, and what the final pot size are going to be, and if that's in line with your goals, is going to be massively, massively helpful. And while your next thought might be, well, won't that be very obvious, right? If I bet weaker hands for smaller sizes and my really, really strong hands for bigger sizes? And fair, but my follow-up question to you would be, do bad players really pick up on this? If not, what are you concerned about? So I think that's a good place to put a pin in it for this concept. Again, this is pot geometry. If you want to practice with this skill set, and especially if you play live cash games, I would 100% suggest you pick up my new live cash games workbook. It goes through more examples and spots just like this with pot geometry, EV, pot odds, pre-flop ranges, implied odds, multi-way pots, straddle pots, and tons more. If you're looking to understand what you should be studying and practicing between sessions to make sure in real time you have extra brain power for things that actually matter, definitely make sure to pick up the book today, splitsuit.com/live. That's LIVE, splitsuit.com/live, or leave a link down in the description box if you want to pick up your copy. There's also the paperback available on Amazon if you prefer a good old pen and paper, or the digital copy like I showed in this video. You can write directly into it, save your answers, which makes life really, really easy for later review. But either way, thanks for hanging out today. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you have any comments or questions, please do not hesitate to leave one down below. Otherwise, I'll see you back shortly with a brand new video. And in the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.